His biceps were bulging. I mean, you could see the veins pulsing under the skin like he was carved out of granite. The first time I saw him, he was lifting more weight than I could even dream of. And it wasn't just his physique that caught my eye. It was the way he moved, the confidence, that quiet intensity. I'd been going to that gym for a while, and I'd never seen anyone train with such focus. It was like he wasn't just working out, he was sculpting himself into something greater. He was older, for sure, easily in his 50s, but age hadn't touched him in the usual way. It was like he'd found a way to push it back, and instead of wearing him down, it just chiseled him out even sharper. I didn't even realize I was staring until he caught me, his deep brown eyes locking onto mine with an expression that was more amused than annoyed. I quickly turned away, embarrassed, but when I glanced back, he was still looking, a smirk on his lips that made my heart skip a beat. The next day, I was back at the gym, same time, same routine. I figured he'd forgotten about me. Why wouldn't he? But there he was again, lifting the kind of weight that made the metal bars bend under the pressure. And when he finished his set, he came over to the machine I was using. I froze, my mind racing with all sorts of wild thoughts. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the sweat on his skin mixed with his faint cologne and said, "Need a spot?" It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Low, almost teasing, like he knew exactly how I'd been watching him. I stammered out some kind of response, and before I knew it, he was behind me, his hands hovering just inches from my body as I struggled through my reps. His voice was in my ear, encouraging me, pushing me to give just a little more. And when I collapsed on the bench, panting, he patted my shoulder and said, "You've got potential." Over the next few weeks, I kept running into him, like we were somehow on the same schedule without planning it. He'd give me pointers, sometimes correcting my form, sometimes just chatting. I found out his name was Greg. He used to be a competitive bodybuilder in his younger days, and now he trained people on the side for fun. But it wasn't just advice and small talk. There was a kind of energy between us that I didn't know what to do with. Every time he'd touch me, even if it was just to adjust my posture, there was this spark. It was in the way his hand would linger a little longer than necessary on my back, or the way his eyes would seem to trail over my body when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination getting the best of me. But then came the night when the gym was almost empty. I was finishing up my routine and Greg came over. He didn't offer to spot me this time. Instead, he leaned against the wall, just watching. "You're getting stronger," he said, his voice that familiar low rumble. "I can see the difference." I laughed, shrugging it off, but then he stepped closer. There was something different in his eyes this time, something more intense. "I've been watching you," he said, "for a while now." His hand brushed against my arm, and I swear I felt the heat of his touch all the way down to my toes. Before I could think, I said, "And what have you seen?" He smirked, his fingers curling lightly around my wrist. "Someone who's more than ready to push himself. Someone who needs a little more motivation." There was no mistaking his meaning, and for a moment all I could do was stand there, my heart racing. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew that I wanted it. I wanted him. And when he leaned in, I met him halfway. His lips were warm, and when we kissed, it felt like he was pouring all that intensity, all that strength into me. From that moment, everything changed. Our workouts became something else, something more. We'd stay late long after the other gym goers had gone. It wasn't just training anymore, it was an unspoken ritual. We'd push each other, harder, heavier, like we were testing the limits of not just our bodies, but whatever was happening between us. And when the lights were dim and the sweat was pouring down our skin, he'd pull me close, his breath hot against my ear, whispering things that made my entire body ache with need. Outside the gym, things were different. He was still that confident older guy who seemed to have life all figured out, while I was just trying to keep up. There was the age gap, sure, but it wasn't just about numbers. It was about experience. He'd lived more life, faced more challenges, and sometimes I'd wonder what he saw in someone like me. But when we were together, I didn't question it. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, It was like he was sharing a part of himself that he didn't show to anyone else. It wasn't long before I realized that it wasn't just lust. I was falling for him hard. I didn't know how to say it, and maybe I was afraid too, afraid that I'd ruin whatever we had going. But one night, after a particularly grueling workout, as we were lying on the mats catching our breath, he turned to me and said, "You know, you've changed a lot since we first met." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He reached out, tracing a finger down my chest. "I mean, you've found a fire in yourself. It's been there all along, but now it's blazing." I didn't know what to say, but he didn't seem to expect an answer. He just leaned in, kissed me softly, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he said, "I think I'm falling for you." Hearing those words from him was like someone lifting a weight off my chest I didn't know was there. I laughed, a little shakily, and said, "Funny." I was just thinking the same thing. From then on, it was like we weren't just working out together. We were building something, and every time we pushed through a new challenge or hit a new milestone, it was like a part of us grew stronger. The age gap didn't matter. The looks we got didn't matter. It was just me and him, and the rest of the world could wait.